clothe myself in love, and I need, as we said last week, to take that habit and assume and clothe the other person in love as well. Seek the best I can to understand their particular motivations. Another thing that Paul is saying here that's new and different, and Jesus said this as well, goes back to all the way back to Genesis and the original arranged marriage, Adam and Eve, which was the model. The Old Testament has kind of gone a lot of different ways in terms of looking at relationships differently without saying it's a bad thing. David had lots of wives, Solomon had lots of wives, there were concubines, and the Bible doesn't, the Old Testament doesn't say that's all bad, but we're kind of having a reestablishment of the original principles that were established in creation here, in the words of Jesus and in the words of Paul. And the important factor here is that everybody has a responsibility, and one of the pieces of responsibility is that people stay connected, stay committed, and commit themselves to being a part of the solution to whatever issues are facing the family unit. Now, I recognize that that doesn't happen perfectly. I recognize that it does not happen perfectly in this church. There are people in our fellowship who are divorced and remarried or not. And this is not meant to be a word of judgment. It's not meant to say anything about that at all, except to say, here's where we are. Moving forward in our relationships, we can be a different kind of person as we clothe ourselves in love in the Spirit of Jesus Christ. We commit ourselves to staying connected in those relationships, whether they're spouses, whether they're children, whether they're grandparents, whatever they are, because we are committed to each other. It's not to fight only for our own way or to blame others, which is another way of fighting. Blame does absolutely no good in our battles, and we are so quick to blame. We're so quick to blame, and it does absolutely no good. Just don't blame anybody for anything. I mean, it just doesn't do any good. Think of a time when blaming somebody for something did anything in your life. Now, if you can think of one, let me know. But there probably are some, but hardly any. Blame just doesn't do any good. So we don't fight. But neither do we pull away, either by not doing and living up to our own particular responsibilities in a relationship or leaving it altogether. We stay connected, we stay calm. Even with adults, timeouts are allowed. Sometimes we need them. I love my garden. I spend a lot of time in my garden. I love to run. I spend a lot of time in running away from particular issues, knowing that I do need to come back. And I stick with it, and I stay with that connection and that commitment because I said I would. Sometimes that's the only reason why. After a moment of intense conversation with my wife, and we had timeouts, and we decided that we're actually going to stick with it. And she might come up to me and she might say something like, and she's almost always the one who would say this and not me, I don't know why. Do you still love me? And I'll say, yes. And she'll say, why? And I'll say, because I said I would. Sometimes that's all I can say. Sometimes that's it. That's the only reason why I can stay connected at that particular point in time. Because something in my honor says that I said I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it. I calm down, stay connected as we work through the difficulties and the challenges that we have. Putting on myself Christ-like love and clothing my loved one in that same love and recognizing that we have to work through this. Our closest connections affect all the other connections. Just like all the other connections affect those closest connections. They're all interrelated. They form a cross. And you can't have a cross without being connected. And it's just the way life is. We may not always like it, but it's the way it is, and we have to learn to deal with it, good, bad, or otherwise. It's important to understand where we've come from in order to understand who we are and where we might go in our lives from this place. This is the third time I've preached this sermon today, which is not unusual, except that I recognize that this way more material than I could ever have packed into one sermon. And maybe we'll come back to it on another day, or maybe we won't. But I just want us to just focus on what that means in our lives, to clothe ourselves with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony, and to recognize that we need to be intentional about being like and seeing Jesus, being like Jesus ourselves and seeing Jesus in others. And the whole point of responsibility in our relationships with those who are closest to us, we only have to be responsible for those things that we are responsible for. We don't have to be responsible for anything more than that. And sometimes in our relationships, when we're having those moments of intense conversation, we want the other person to change. And the reality is, and some of you have been married a lot longer than I have, the reality is there's only one person that we can never change, and that's ourselves. And when I begin to think in my relationship with those who are closest to me about the ways that I need to change, a couple of amazing things happen. First of all, I find out in humility how much I've been a part of the problem, even though I'm not blaming somebody else. And in my humility, recognizing that I've been a part of the problem and being willing to change myself, I don't have to change somebody else. They will, not always, but quite often, change themselves. We can only take responsibility for ourselves. But when we do take responsibility for ourselves, we find that we are more likely to make a difference in the life of the other person. Because we've stayed connected, we've stayed calm, we've tried to be as much as we can like Jesus Christ in those relationships. And we will be rewarded for that spirit in our relationships with those closest to us. And as those relationships improve and grow and strengthen and become more like Jesus Christ, all of our other relationships will improve as well. That's it. I got more to say, but I'm out of time. So thanks be to God for these words from His Holy Scriptures. Amen.